Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. Was Franklin Pierce the saddest president of the United States? I guess I don't know what they mean by the saddest. I know one incident in particular that did not have a very happy thing before his presidency. I think he had a couple kids die at young ages, but I don't remember exactly. Oh, no, I'm already subscribed. Sorry. Anyways, there's a video. Thumbs up, subscribe if you could. Click on that thanks button. If you'd like to donate to the channel, it helps. But bare minimum, if you can give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel helps out. Because, tells YouTube I'm decent. And what am I doing this for? All right, let's get into the video.
Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today we're talking about one of the worst presidents in history, and likely we have an accompanying poll where you can vote on whether or not he deserves that title above some other historical examples. Today's script was provided by the ever-factual Larry Holsworth, so be sure to show the man some love in the comments and gear.
Is he one of the worst? Sorry, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I'm looking at the books that I have, the presidential books, and I'm kind of eyeballing. Am I drooling? I'm eyeballing some of the presidents. Franklin Pierce, Warren G. Harding, James Buchanan. I don't know enough about Millard Fillmore, but the name alone, Millard Fillmore, which isn't fair, but I don't know enough about him right now. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm not going to put him on the list because, look, in 30 years, he could be viewed completely different, and things that he's done could be thought of as ahead of its curve. So it's too early to tell on him. William Henry Harrison, 30 days in office. He's incomplete. He'll never get a pass or a fail to me. I mean, he died in office. You can't judge that. Zachary Taylor, same thing. He died 18 months in office. James Garfield died very shortly in office. And I mean, those were guys that died 30 days, 6 months for Garfield, and I think just around 18 months for Zachary Taylor. They didn't even finish a term. They didn't even get to 2 years, so I will never put them on a failed list. I think that it's not fair to put them on that list. That's my opinion. Man, I'd really have to think about who I'd put on number 5. Probably George Washington. Yeah, failure. Abraham Lincoln was a failure. Teddy Roosevelt, God, that guy sucked. Yeah, those are all failures. I don't know who I'd put on there for 5, honestly. I haven't really gone through a list, but none of this is about me. I just made a comment on there, and I could keep talking. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to open up a beer, and we're going to sit back and enjoy a video.
Up for one of the saddest presidential stories you're likely to hear. Franklin Pierce, who pronounces his surname as Pierce, is consistently ranked as one of the worst presidents in American history. His administration, which occurred in the decade preceding the American Civil War, is cited as one in which the causes of that war were exacerbated.
Pierce? I've never heard a single soul call him Pierce. Not saying that we're wrong, or not saying that we're right. But on a side note, Barbara Bush, before she married George H.W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, was Barbara Pierce. So she was a descendant of the Pierce line.
by the president's policies. Though a native of New Hampshire, Pierce generated considerable enmity from his fellow New Englanders, largely due to his stand against the abolitionists that demanded an end to slavery. His political skills were unequal to the challenges he faced in office, and his own Democratic Party refused to nominate him to run for a second term, an almost unheard of circumstance in American politics. His life was one of tragedy and melancholy. His wife's family disapproved of him. It took 8 years of courting before she could be persuaded to marry him. Jane Means Appleton, who eventually became his wife, was deeply religious, hated politics, despised Washington, and opposed the consumption of alcohol to the point she was active in temperance movements in antebellum New England. Pierce.
He was a drinker. And when they discuss his White House days, I'm hoping they'll discuss a lot of that too.
On the other hand, thrived in political and legal maneuvers, drank to excess, and served in several posts in Washington. His views on religion can be surmised by his refusal to take the oath of office as president by swearing on a Bible. He affirmed his oath with his hand on a law book. Franklin Pierce entered the presidency prone to bouts of depression, his wife having refused to accompany him to Washington. Throughout his 4 years in office, he drank to excess. His was a gloomy, unhappy White House.
Something that in the White House, he did drink to excess, and in some members of his cabinet, I think, was Henry Clay in there? Give me a second, I want to check. Okay, no. Henry Clay died in 1852. Pierce was elected in 1853. Some people in his cabinet was William L. Marcy, Secretary of State, and Secretary of War, drumroll, Jefferson Davis, who also, when he got married, when he first got in the military, served under Zachary Taylor and fell in love with Zachary Taylor's oldest daughter and asked Zachary Taylor if he could marry her. Taylor said, "No, my daughter will not." Oh, I'm sorry. He said, "No, my daughter will not marry a military man." So he quit the military. This was... Oh my goodness, what war was this? Anyway, it didn't matter. They were... I think it was around the Mexican-American War. Anyways, yeah, he quit politics, married her. They got married. I think she got pregnant, and then she got tuberculosis, and she died. I'm sorry. So I have this terrible habit, and I apologize, where we're talking about somebody, and then another name pops up, and I'll start telling you a fact about that person, and then from there, something else, and then and next thing you know, I'm like, who's the video about? I apologize for that.
May well have been one of the worst.
So the reason why I paused was because I'm a damn fool. So he was saying he was a drunk in his cabinet. Or he was a drunk in the White House. There were times when he would drink, and they're going to get into it. They have to get into it. If they don't, I'm going to be pissed, and I will explain it. When he was the president, there were times he would get drunk and pass out on tables, and his cabinet would come in, find him there, and then they would just sit down while he was passed out drunk, sleeping one off. They would conduct a meeting on the table or around the table that he was on so that they could say he was present for the meeting. That's how bad it got.
Worst presidents in history. He may also have been the saddest, or at the very least, the unhappiest.
And he keeps saying the saddest. I'll say this. We all handle things differently. And that's important. We all handle things differently. During the Civil War, Lincoln lost, was it Tad or Willie? Oh. Damn. He lost, insert name here, during the Civil War. how he handled that. Oh, come on. I wish this thing would stop glitching. How he handled that was that he was able to push it all aside and focus on the problem. Now, he was dealing with a war, so he had to focus on that problem, granted. But we all deal with things differently. So some of the things that Pierce went through, I can never sit here and say, I could have handled it better. I could have done this. I could have done that. I'll never sit here and say that. Because I don't know how I would handle things in that situation. If I was the president when my mom died, I don't know how long I would have went through issues. Same with my father. So and granted, those aren't children, but we all deal with grief and sadness differently. And I think that's very important to try to remember when you're grading a president based on him being sad or depressed or he didn't handle it well. Well, we all handle things differently.
Franklin Pierce's climb to the presidency included what would, in a much later day, become known as getting all of his tickets punched. His experience in politics began in the most democratic of all American forms of government, the New England town meeting. Eventually, he served in the New Hampshire state legislature, where he rose to the position of Speaker of the House. Later, he served in the United States House of Representatives, and still later in the United States Senate. He served over a decade in the New Hampshire state militia, reaching the rank of colonel, and during the Mexican-American War, he held a commission as a brigadier general in the regular army, serving with distinction. By the time he came under consideration for the presidency, his resume was impressive, to say the least. But it did not begin that way. Franklin Pierce was born in 1804 in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. He was the fifth of what would be 8 children born to tavern keeper and American Revolutionary War hero Benjamin Pierce and his wife Anna. According to family lore, Franklin was born in the log cabin then occupied by his parents and siblings. However, the large Pierce homestead in Hillsborough, which still stands, is advertised as his childhood home. Except for when he was away at school, the house was Franklin's home until his marriage in 1834. Pierce was a reluctant student in his youth, to say the least. Sent by his father to attend the town school in Hancock, some 12 miles distant, Franklin ran away, returning to the family homestead in Hillsborough. His father, by then a state legislator and prominent politician, forced him to return to school. 2 of Franklin's elder brothers.
I started reading my Franklin Pierce book 4 or 5 years ago. Never finished it. Sorry. It starts off basically, he ran away from school, came home. His mom and dad were on a carriage ride. They came home and they saw him and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I quit school." They're like, "Oh, okay. We get it. Come on in. We'll make you something to eat." So he goes inside. The mom is getting some stuff ready. And the father's like, "Hey, come outside with me. I want to talk." So they go out and talk. Father's like, "Okay, let's get in the carriage. Let's go for a little ride." Okay. He goes for a ride. His father takes him. Oh, I don't remember how far it was. A couple of miles, maybe, to the end of the family's, maybe it's a mile, the end of the family's land. And stops, and there's no talking this entire time. Stops and tells him, "Okay, this is as far as I take you." Franklin's like, "Far as you take me for what?" He's like, "Well, you're going back to school, but I'm not riding you back, because then you'll just do it again and I'll ride you back. You got out, you walked here. This is as far as I take you. You go back from here. Next time you want to escape, you come to the house. You walk from the house back there. Have a good night. Safe trip." And Franklin was like, "All right." And he left. He had to walk all the way back. And it's like, that's a way to do it, I guess.
Both veterans of the War of 1812 counseled their younger sibling to focus on his studies, ignoring any pangs caused by being away from home. Franklin heeded their advice, eventually attending Phillips Exeter Academy in Andover and then enrolling in Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. While there, he befriended a young Nathaniel Hawthorne as well as other young men with whom he would later serve in Congress. After graduating from Bowdoin with a Bachelor of Arts degree, Franklin read the law under the guidance of attorney and former governor of New Hampshire, Levi Woodbury, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He later attended law school in Northampton, Massachusetts, and passed the bar in New Hampshire in 1827. And then he established a legal practice in Hillsborough that year. In the meantime, Benjamin Pierce had continued to advance his own political career as a pro-Andrew Jackson Democrat. In March 1827, Benjamin was elected as governor of New Hampshire. His son Franklin likewise sought political office and won the position.
I'll find the button. On a side note, hold on.
Career as a pro-Andrew.
That is I think it's the only Andrew Jackson picture. And Andrew Jackson is the second president to have his picture taken. The first was John Quincy Adams. And it's a very famous picture where Adams is he's got kind of one eye raised, kind of like he was thinking, is this going to explode? But they're both older guys.
Jackson Democrat. In March 1827, Benjamin was elected as governor of New Hampshire. His son Franklin likewise sought political office and won the position of moderator of Hillsborough's town meeting in the elections of 1828. He won the office again in the following 5 years. In 1829, Franklin also won election to the state legislature. 2 years later, with the Democrats holding a clear majority in New Hampshire, Franklin Pierce was elected as Speaker of the State House of Representatives. He was 27 years of age and the rising star of New Hampshire politics. How and when Jane Appleton became acquainted with Franklin Pierce is disputed. One claim from family lore holds that Franklin introduced himself to Jane during a thunderstorm, when he warned her against seeking shelter beneath a tree, an introduction by one of his Bowdoin professors in another version often cited. However, it actually happened. Historians agree it was not welcomed by Jane's family, and that's probably an understatement. The Appletons were wealthy, politically connected, anti-slavery, and pro-temperance. Jane was well-educated, well-read, and possessed of musical talent. Refined and cultured, she was also deeply religious with puritanical leanings, which did little to alleviate her condemnation of demon rum. While she obviously found some attraction in the young Franklin Pierce, her family did not share her enthusiasm. They found him coarse beneath her station, of the wrong political bent, ill-mannered, and too prone to indulge in alcohol. Even worse, his Episcopalian leanings were anathema to their Calvinist beliefs. They also looked askance at his obvious political ambitions as being low-minded and uncultured. To the Appletons, Franklin Pierce came up well short of their ideal match for Jane. Franklin Pierce did not view his political ambitions as a personal quest for power and influence. Following the examples set by his father and others, he viewed public service through political office as a noble cause. Though he disagreed with the political views of the Appletons and others in New England, including the abolitionists, he did not view such disagreements as being exclusive of personal relationships. He continued to court Jane Appleton despite the growing disparity of views dividing American politics, especially the issues of slavery, its containment in the states in which it already existed, and its exclusion from new states seeking admission into the Union. Pierce's growing influence in New Hampshire politics brought with it an elevation in social affairs as well. By 1832, his position as well as Jane's advancing age led her family to regard his courtship with, let's say, some more welcoming attitudes. Jane was by then 26 years of age, considered old to be unmarried in that time and place. That year, Franklin was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. As he neared the end of his term as Speaker of the House and the state legislature, Jane agreed to marry the politician, and they were wed on November 19, 1834. Following their marriage, the new bride accompanied her husband to Washington and the boarding house where he lived while Congress was in session. Much has been made of Franklin Pierce's drinking, with some biographers expressing the belief that he enjoyed the bottle to excess for most of his adult life. Others have claimed that Pierce did not indulge in heavy drinking until later tragedies had overwhelmed him. That Jane, a teetotaler and temperance supporter, agreed to marry him would seem to indicate she did not consider his drinking to be a serious problem, at least not at the time they were married.
He was a heavy drinker, and then I think it was because of her, he toned it down and really got it under control until later aspects of life.
Or maybe she believed she could fix him. Whichever it may have been, it was not destined to be a happy marriage. Again, an understatement. In 1833, Franklin Pierce went from being the leader of the Democratic faction in the New Hampshire legislature to being a junior representative in the United States Congress. The Democrats held the majority in 1833, though Pierce on more than one occasion voted against party measures. He opposed using federal money to fund improvements in infrastructure, such as roads and canals, believing such efforts to be within the purview of the individual states. He also became a leading voice against the rising influence of the abolitionists in Congress, viewing them as agitators. Pierce defended the rights of the states over the power of the federal government regarding slavery, which he considered to be a legal issue of property rather than, a moral issue of human rights. Pierce also opposed the religious caste of abolitionists, who decried the Southern slave owners as sinners. To Pierce, such religious bigotry was abhorrent. He publicly condemned slavery as a social and political evil, expressing the wish that it had no existence on the face of the earth, but also expressed that the abolitionist movement must be crushed or there is an end to the Union. Pierce was re-elected to the House in 1836. By then, he lived in Washington alone while Congress was in session. Jane had found the social scene in Washington to be unbearable. The manners and behavior in the city were repugnant to her New England sensibilities, and in 1835, she left the city to reside with her mother.
Just put a pin in that. She was not a fan of Washington. Just remember that for the future.
She cited her failing health as an excuse to leave Washington. Franklin purchased a home in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, though she found that residence equally untenable during the periods when her husband was absent in Washington. On February 2nd, 1836, Jane gave birth to a son the Pierces named Franklin Jr. The infant died 3 days later on February 5th. Both parents were thrust into deep melancholy. Franklin delved deeply into his work, while Jane found continued residence in Hillsborough to be unthinkable. The couple purchased another home in Concord, New Hampshire, in 1838. By then, Franklin was no longer sitting in the House of Representatives. In 1837, Franklin Pierce had been elected to the United States Senate by the New Hampshire legislature. Franklin Pierce entered the U.S. Senate during emotionally trying times. His wife had not recovered from the loss of their son and had begun to complain of severe chronic health issues. Franklin's own mental well-being had been similarly affected, and among his cronies in Congress, he began to develop the reputation of being a heavy drinker, during an age when excessively heavy drinking, at least to modern eyes, was the norm. Nonetheless, he was considered an able senator, reliably supporting or opposing legislation along party lines. He also demonstrated an ability to bestow political patronage. In one example, he appointed his longtime friend Nathaniel Hawthorne as a custodian of coal and salt in the port of Boston. The position, ostensibly in the Boston Customs House, was what would later be known as a no-show job. The sinecure provided Hawthorne with an income, demanded little of his time, and supported the writer as he produced the short stories collected into the volume Twice Told Tales, his first major literary success. Meanwhile, Jane had come to the conclusion that the death of their infant son had been divine retribution for the sinful and profligate ways of her husband. Reinforced by relatives from her mother's family, Jane wrote her husband letters in which all of their woes were laid plainly at his feet, punishment for his choice of career. To Jane, even her husband's
You're being blamed for the death of your child. And you're a depressed person who drinks a lot. Do you think that sobered him up, knowing that his alcohol had nothing to do with the death of his child? Or do you think that guilt made him drink more? I put it out there. I let you decide.
drinking was an effect rather than a cause. She joined him in Washington, made some of the demanded social appearances, and soon fled back to her family. During her visits to Washington, she strongly encouraged her husband to exit politics. In 1839, Jane and Franklin Pierce welcomed a second son into the world, whom they named Frank Robert Pierce. Young Frank provided further motivation for Jane to convince her husband to enter another career. By late 1840, a presidential election year, Franklin had come to agree with his wife. The Democrats lost both the White House and the Senate majority in that year's election. Franklin was also term limited by New Hampshire law, meaning he could not run for re-election for another term as senator at the end of his current term. By then, Jane
1840. 1844 was Polk. So 1840 must have been William Henry Harrison, who dies. Number 9. And then John Tyler takes over.
And Franklin had another son, Benjamin Pierce, born April 13, 1841. The presence of two sons with Jane at the Concord home provided further inducement for Franklin to leave the Senate. Franklin Pierce resigned from the Senate in early 1842 and returned to the practice of law in Concord, New Hampshire. He had no intention of retiring from politics, as subsequent events demonstrated, though to his wife he promised he would focus on the practice of law. In Concord, Franklin Pierce entered into a law practice which enhanced his reputation as a capable attorney while affording him the time to remain active in state political circles. Jane, meanwhile, enjoyed her status as the wife of a well-regarded lawyer and former senator. She became an active participant in Concord's social scene and entertained numerous notable guests in their home, including writers, legislators, educators, and other celebrated personages. For a very brief time, all was well in the Pierce household and marriage. Then, in 1843, an epidemic of typhus swept through Concord. Before it was over, it had claimed the life of young Frank Robert Pierce at the age of 4. Both Franklin and Jane were again stricken with the deep grief caused by the loss of a child. Jane took solace in prayer, penitence, and the presence of her sole surviving child. Franklin, however, sought relief from his pain through his work, party politics, and increasingly, the bottle. Franklin hired a married couple to attend to the household duties at Concord, freeing Jane of her domestic responsibilities and allowing her to spend all of her time with their surviving son, Benjamin. She devoted herself to her son completely, ignoring social invitations and activities, and personally supervising his education in a strictly Puritan religious environment. Franklin Pierce had...
Which is going to be crushing down the road.
Promised his wife he would not accept political office, and though he served as the chairman of the state's Democratic Committee, he refused the office of Attorney General when offered it by President James K. Polk. A military appointment, though, was another matter. In 1846, after Congress declared war on Mexico, Pierce accepted a commission as a colonel in the 9th Infantry Regiment of the United States Army. In early 1847, he was promoted to brigadier general and sent to Veracruz under the command of General Winfield Scott. Pierce served with distinction in Mexico, and when he returned to Concord, he was greeted with a hero's welcome in late 1847.
I think had he not gotten into the Mexican-American War, this is my opinion, had he not got into the Mexican-American War, he does not have political ambition. Winfield Scott did. But had he not gotten into it, I don't think he has the political ambition. I could be wrong. It could have always just been there, but it could have been tempered. But I think him getting into this, and it's not the military aspect, it's the name recognition. It's the serving with distinction. The nation knows your name. He could have went back to being a lawyer and probably profited off of it in the area that he was at, because he wasn't going to travel. Or you get back into politics. When your name is kicked around and you're thought of as, hey, look, this guy served with distinction, why can't we trust him to be the president? Up to this point, James K. Polk being 11, Washington served in the military. John Adams, no. Thomas Jefferson, no. James Madison at number 4, no. But was another a wartime president. James Monroe served in the Revolutionary War. Guy got shot in the neck, severed an artery. John Quincy Adams, number 6, no. Number 7, Andrew Jackson, War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans. Revolutionary War. I mean, Martin Van Buren, no. I don't know enough about Martin Van Buren, but I'm going to say no. Martin Van Buren, by the way, first language, not English, it was Dutch. So he's 8, 9. William Henry Harrison, absolutely. William Henry Harrison stays in the game at War of 1812. I don't think Andrew Jackson's name rises up. It's when he resigns, Andrew Jackson fills that void, amongst others, but Andrew Jackson fills that void. Guy who served under William Henry Harrison. See, I do this. Side note, William Henry Harrison is a guy named Edmund P. Gaines. Edmund Pendleton Gaines. Gaines. He's a fascinating person. He is fascinating. Should be a more well-known name to me. But maybe it's just because he's kind of blown me away with things that I've read about him. John Tyler, no. That's 10. We're at Polk. I don't think Polk served. I think Polk was always just a politician. But I'm saying that I'm talking an awful lot, and I apologize. I love presidents. I'm saying that to where Franklin Pierce is not the first person who's been military, who's been put in a situation, name all over the place. It's happened through our history. Dwight Eisenhower. I mean, we fall in love with our military guys here. And when we do, we want to put them in charge. We trust them. Dwight Eisenhower, by the way, great president. We trust these people. And we want to put them in charge. Zachary Taylor. Although he was 12. Mexican-American War. Gets a name with distinction. What's he do? He goes on to become president. Winfield Scott was trying to get there too. So, this isn't the first person who's built a name through the military, got recognition, and used that to move on.
Following the American victory in the Mexican War, he resumed his law practice, reassured his wife that he had no political ambition, and appeared for all intents and purposes to be content with his lot. In 1852, the Democratic Party prepared for the presidential election with a June convention in Baltimore, Maryland. The party was deeply divided, largely over the issue of slavery and its expansion into...
1852. So, James K. Polk was 1844 to 48, only needed 4 years. He dies like 6 months after he leaves office. Not even that. He's number 11. Number 12 is Zachary Taylor, who dies in office. He's replaced by number 13, Millard Fillmore. I mean, we know about the accomplishments of Millard Fillmore, obviously. One of his accomplishments was he voted, since he's the vice president, he's the president of the Senate. He voted down a bill that Zachary Taylor wanted. And when asked, why did you vote down the bill? You're the vice president. I'm the president. You're the this is me just making up a conversation. You can understand. I'm the president. I'm Zachary Taylor. You're Millard Fillmore. Why did you vote down the bill that I wanted? To which the response was, yeah, I don't like it. And any bill that I don't like, I'm going to vote against. Imagine that shit happening today. How many times would a vice president be replaced?
to new states and territories. Among the candidates for the nomination for president were Sam Houston of Texas, Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri, and James Buchanan of Pennsylvania. Pierce remained in New Hampshire, far from the brokering and deal-making on the convention floor. Yet,
I'm sorry I'm talking so much. A lot of the hate that we give James Buchanan today This hurts to say. It comes from someone on Buchanan's staff named Edwin Stanton. I know you're looking at my channel and you're like, Kris Stanton, huh? Yeah. A lot of the negativity was stuff that Edwin Stanton said that a lot of us now go by because he was in the cabinet. He said things like, oh, Buchanan was indecisive. Buchanan was this. I'm the reason why this happened. Oh, no, that was a bad idea. So that was Buchanan. And a lot of that is sorry, my chair's squeaking. It's a lot of that stuff is still kicked around as legit. Is it legit? I honestly don't know. But did George Washington really throw a stone over the Potomac River that's a mile wide? No. Did he chop down a cherry tree? No. But these are myths that continue. I think a lot of what Buchanan did may not have been good, but I'm not sure how much of it, the negativity, is legit. Because when Stanton worked for Lincoln, there were things that happened that were kind of like, he seems dramatic. Well, if he's dramatic, maybe he's dramatic about conversations or remembering things incorrectly. Has nothing to do with Franklin Pierce. I do apologize. I like talking presidents, man. I'm sorry. And I'm drinking, so I'm having a great time. It's double the fun.
He allowed his supporters in the party to enter his name as a candidate after several ballots failed to select a nominee.
They all
on the
did.
49th ballot of the contentious
They all let someone else enter their name because they didn't want to look like they were eager to be the president. They wanted somebody else to make it look like they were eager for them to be the president.
gathering, Franklin Pierce acquired the needed votes to become the Democratic nominee for president. A subsequent ballot named William Rufus King as his running mate. Pierce received the news via a telegram to his Concord home. When Jane heard the news, she collapsed in a faint. Pierce's opponent was Winfield Scott, who had been his commanding officer in Mexico. Scott, though a celebrated war hero for his actions in Mexico, proved an unpopular presidential candidate. Franklin Pierce won the election handedly, achieving a majority of the popular vote and a landslide in the Electoral College. It was the peak of his political career, before he was to enter what historians rank as one of the nation's worst presidential administrations. He was fated to suffer one more personal tragedy, from which neither he nor his wife would ever fully recover.
I just want to say, and I've said a lot, but I want to say that this is the incident that I'm talking about, and I can't tell you how I would handle it. I can't tell you I would be any better than what happened. And when you're dealing with somebody who's an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, I'll say, and somebody who deals with massive depression as he did, I can't tell you I'd be any better. And this is going to be a sad one.
In December 1852, Pierce, Jane, and their son Benjamin nicknamed.
Before I let him go any further, his wife begged him to not become the president. I believe she thought there was a bad omen to it. She didn't want to go back to Washington, but she begged him. There was a bad omen. It didn't feel right.
In December 1852, Pierce, Jane, and their son Benjamin, nicknamed Benny, spent the Christmas holidays with Jane's sister and her husband in Andover, Massachusetts. Jane's sister was married to John Aiken, a textiles manufacturer and a leading benefactor of Phillips Academy, where Benny was scheduled to enroll. The Pierces were frequent guests of the Aikens, and the holidays were less tense than they may have been given Jane's displeasure over her husband's return to politics. On January 6, 1853, the Pierce family departed Andover by train for the journey to Concord, where Jane and Franklin were to prepare for their journey to Washington and the White House. Benny, then 11 years old, was standing to get a better view out of a window when the train derailed just a few miles north of Andover. The car in which the Perses rode went down an embankment, crushed by its own weight and the following cars. Benny was immediately entangled with the broken wood and iron, which mangled his body and nearly decapitated him. The grisly accident occurred directly in front of his parents, and Franklin was later further traumatized by the necessity of identifying his dead son's body. Benny's body was returned to the Aiken home in Andover, where a funeral service was held before the president-elect's son was conveyed to Concord for burial. Franklin Pierce accompanied his son's body to Concord. Jane, unable to bear her grief, did not, remaining behind in Andover. 6 weeks after the tragedy, Franklin Pierce left Concord to journey to Washington and his inauguration as the 14th President of the United States. His wife accompanied him as far as Baltimore, where she remained as her husband took the oath of office. There were no inaugural balls, no celebration at the president's mansion. Despite the large crowd which swelled Washington to see the new president enter office, an air of gloom predominated. It would last for the rest of his presidency.
So that was his last child. That's what makes it so difficult. He lost 2 children at a young age, and then he loses the last child on that train derailment. And by the way, the only car in the entire presidential train that got turned sideways. I've heard that a piece of glass shattered and had fallen and decapitated the kid in front of him. Doesn't really matter. Your kid was killed in front of you. His wife started wearing black for mourning. Every time he was around, she would just start crying. And she blamed him for it for the rest of their life. She blamed him for this. He wanted this. He caused this. Now you might understand why he would be drunk and fall asleep on tables at the White House, because he didn't want to go back to the residency. And that's pretty much how he spent his time as president. He was not able to pull himself out of it. And he gets a bad rap for this. And of course, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. But he gets a bad rap. And I can't tell you I would have handled it any better.
Jane Pierce eventually joined her husband in Washington, though she never took much interest in the role of First Lady. For the rest of her life, she wore black. Interestingly, she summoned spiritualists to the White House in attempts to contact her dead son, and she wrote notes and letters addressed to him, describing the events of the day. To the Washington press, she became known as the Shadow in the White House. Eventually, the phrase came to refer to the Pierce's administration, as Franklin's policies created more and more enemies. Pierce's vice president, William Rufus King, took his oath of office while in Cuba, the only American vice president to be inaugurated while on foreign soil. He was there in an attempt to recover his health, having contracted tuberculosis. The attempt failed. King died at his home in Alabama on April 18, 1853. His death removed Pierce's important political links with Southern Democrats. Pierce's policies and his own fervent anti-abolitionism destroyed his standing with Northern Democrats. Having lost the support of his own party, his wife, and his Southern allies, Pierce's administration was doomed to failure. By the last year of his administration, he was virtually an exile in the White House, though a defiant one. His support of the Fugitive Slave Act and the Kansas-Nebraska Acts alienated what was left of the coalition which elected him. Kansas erupted in bloody violence, which the president was seemingly powerless to stop. The Democratic Party chose not to nominate him to run for a second term, and Pierce left the White House and politics in 1857. In retirement, Pierce continued to voice his opinions and became a staunch opponent of the Lincoln administration during the Civil War. Yet his was the perverse.
To be fair, he was a Democrat. James Buchanan was a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican. Just like today, you're going to voice an opinion against the other party.
proverbial voice in the wilderness. With Jane, he traveled extensively, visiting his friend Nathaniel Hawthorne in Europe and writing for newspapers in England and the United States. He predicted the Civil War as well as the racial strife which was to follow, but his warnings went unheeded. His former political allies and foes regarded him as a crank, and his drinking continued unabated. His alcoholism did not go unnoticed in the press either. Jane Peirce died in December 1863 after a long period of decline due to tuberculosis. Franklin Peirce lived in retirement in New Hampshire until he predictably succumbed to cirrhosis of the liver in October 1869. His health was extensively covered in the nation's newspapers, mostly of which noted his long career in public service culminated by a failed presidency. Unlike many other quote-unquote failed presidents such as John Adams and Harry Truman, his career has never been subjected to a favorable re-examination by historians. He remains widely regarded as one of the worst presidents in American history. His was a life of service, deeply checkered with personal and professional tragedy, which ultimately ended in failure. Truly the saddest of presidents. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure.
Yeah, we look back and we say James Buchanan and Franklin Pierce are bad because they allowed the Civil War to happen. I already said about James Buchanan, a lot of stuff that we go by is from Stanton. Franklin Pierce dealt with tragedy and alcoholism. Were they bad presidents? Could I have done better? That's my judge. Could I have done better? I don't know. So I can't say they were bad. Were they good? No. They made mistakes. Every single president does. Could others have done better? I believe so. Could others have done worse? Abso-freaking-lutely. It's tough. It's tough. So, anyways, we're going to end it there. I apologize. I talked a whole lot. I'm drinking. I feel good. Talking presidents. And unfortunately, this guy's okay. I like Simon Whistler more. I'm wondering if he got out of this because he has so many other projects. But anyways, we'll end it here. I'm just going to shut up. So until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.